You're running 5 minutes late to a meeting, not 30 minutes, not an hour, 5 minutes. And by the time you walk through the door, you've already composed a full paragraph in your head. The traffic, the parking, the thing that happened before you even left the house. Nobody asked, but you're already explaining, or maybe it's smaller than that. Someone asks you a simple question and you answer it, and then keep answering it, adding context nobody requested, rewinding to explain your reasoning, checking their face mid-sentence to see if they still believe you. People who over-explain themselves get written off as anxious, insecure, maybe a little exhausting. But here's what almost nobody says out loud. The over-explaining isn't the problem. It's the evidence. Evidence of something that happened long before the meeting, long before the parking lot. Something that taught you, at a very specific age, that your version of events was never quite enough on its own. Here's what nobody tells you about people who over-explain. It's not a communication problem. It's not a confidence problem. It's a safety problem. Or more precisely, it's a response to a time when being misunderstood had real consequences. The over-explaining isn't noise. It's armor. Every extra sentence is a brick laid down against the possibility of being blamed, dismissed, or punished for something you didn't intend. And your brain didn't build that armor because it's irrational. It built it because at some point, staying silent or giving a short answer genuinely wasn't safe. That's not anxiety. That's memory. Picture this. You're 9 years old, maybe 10. Something went wrong. A broken rule, a bad grade, a misunderstanding between you and a friend. And when you tried to explain your side of it, the adult in the room didn't want to hear it. They'd already decided what happened. They cut you off. Or they listened and still punished you anyway. Or worse, the more you explained, the angrier they got. So your brain ran an experiment. What if I explain better? What if I give them more context? What if I anticipate their objection before they even raise it? Psychologists call this a fawn response, one of the 4 trauma responses alongside fight, flight, and freeze. Dr. Pete Walker, a therapist who has written extensively on childhood emotional neglect, describes fawning as the survival strategy of people who learned that appeasing, explaining, and over-communicating was how you stayed safe. Where fighting was dangerous and fleeing wasn't possible, words became the tool. More words. Better words. Preemptive words. And here's the part that really lands. Your brain didn't learn this from one bad moment. It learned it from a pattern. A household where your explanations were regularly dismissed. A parent who needed to be right. A sibling whose version of events always won. An environment where you had to justify not just your actions, but your feelings, your intentions, your very presence in the conflict. Your nervous system took notes, and it's still running that same script decades later. Even in a parking lot, even 5 minutes late to a meeting, even when absolutely nobody is angry at you. Here's something specific you might recognize. You don't just over-explain after things go wrong. You over-explain before anything has gone wrong at all. You're already building your case while the other person is still forming their thought. That's called anticipatory justification, and research in cognitive psychology shows it's closely linked to environments where judgment was unpredictable. When you grew up never quite knowing which version of a parent you'd come home to, the understanding one or the angry one, your brain learned to prepare for the worst-case version every single time. Not because you're paranoid, because statistically, historically, the worst-case version showed up often enough to take seriously. This isn't overthinking. This is a threat detection system that was calibrated in childhood and hasn't been recalibrated since. You're not anxious about this meeting. You're anxious about a room that no longer exists, and your body hasn't gotten the update yet. And here's the paradox that makes this so complicated. People who over-explain are often the clearest, most thorough communicators in the room. They've had to be. When your words were your primary defense as a child, you got very good at them. You learned to structure an argument, anticipate counterpoints, read the listener's face mid-sentence and adjust in real time. So, you're simultaneously the person who talks too much and the person everyone calls when something needs to be explained well. You're exhausting in casual conversations and indispensable in a crisis. The very mechanism that makes you hard to be around at a dinner party makes you exceptional in a boardroom, a courtroom, a tense family meeting. The over-explaining isn't a flaw running alongside your talent. It is the talent just without an off switch. But here's where it gets harder. Over-explainers don't just over-explain their actions. They over-explain their apologies. A simple, "I'm sorry," never feels like enough, so it becomes, "I'm sorry, and I want you to understand why it happened, and I want you to know that I know it was wrong, and I need you to tell me you actually forgive me, and not just say you do." Dr. Harriet Lerner, psychologist and author of Why Won't You Apologize, describes how people with early experiences of conditional love, love that came with asterisks, love you had to earn back after every conflict, often struggle to let an apology land without certainty that it worked. Because as a child, "I'm sorry" sometimes wasn't enough. Sometimes the punishment came anyway. Sometimes the silence lasted for days. So you learned to keep going until you got a clear signal that you were safe again. That need for confirmation isn't clingy. It's your nervous system asking the question it never got to stop asking, "Am I okay with you right now?" You might also notice something strange. Silence from other people feels actively hostile to you even when it isn't. When someone reads your message and doesn't respond immediately, your brain doesn't think they're probably busy. It thinks they're angry. Or worse, they're talking to someone else about what I said. Psychologists call this negative attribution bias, a tendency to assign negative meaning to neutral signals. And it's significantly more common in people who grew up in households with unpredictable emotional climates. When a parent's silence routinely meant something bad was coming, your brain wired that association deep. Now, every unreturned message carries that same weight, even though the circumstances are completely different. So you follow up. You add context. You send a second message softening the first one, not because you're needy, because your brain is pattern matching to a world that no longer exists, and sending that extra message is the only way to make the alarm quiet down. But here's what rarely gets acknowledged. Underneath the over-explaining, there's a grief. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that lives in the part of you that still remembers what it felt like to be genuinely misunderstood and have absolutely no one in your corner. You grieve the version of yourself who got to speak less, who could say "I don't know" without the floor dropping out, who could be late without rehearsing an explanation before the car even stopped. You grieve the conversations you were never allowed to finish, the times you tried to tell your side and someone talked over you, the moments you sat in your room knowing you were right about something and knowing it didn't matter. You grieve the child who learned that their inner world needed a translator, that feelings didn't count unless you could prove them. That existing in a difficult moment wasn't enough. You also had to narrate it, justify it, and make it palatable to whoever held the power in that room. How do you explain to someone that you're tired from a kind of talking you can't even stop doing? That some of your most exhausting conversations happen entirely inside your own head before anyone's even spoken? This grief doesn't make you weak. It makes you someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, mostly without noticing the weight. So the next time you catch yourself over-explaining, adding the third sentence when two would have done it, softening a boundary with a paragraph of context, rehearsing what you'll say before a conversation has even started, don't shame yourself for it. Understand it. You are not someone who doesn't know when to stop talking. You are someone whose words were once the only tool you had. Every explanation was a tiny act of self-preservation. Every paragraph was a child trying to stay safe in a world that didn't always make that easy. That child was resourceful. They were creative. They used what they had. And now that you're not in that room anymore, now that you get to choose who holds space for you, you're allowed to say less. You're allowed to offer the short answer and let it be enough. You're allowed to sit in silence without interpreting it as a verdict. You were not built to be misunderstood. You were built to make yourself understood in an environment that made that incredibly hard. There's a difference. And it matters. A lawyer doesn't keep presenting evidence after the verdict's been read. At some point, the case is closed. You've already won rooms you were never given credit for. You can rest the argument now.